My name is Kaustubh Srivastava, and today I bring to you one of the most prestigious episodes that I've recorded. This episode features one of the most celebrated legal figures in our country. We are in conversation with Mr. Gopal Sankaranarayanan. Sir is a senior advocate practicing before Supreme Court of India. He is also a frequent writer with Indian Express, and I personally enjoy his articles. He's also the host of Conversations with Citizens, where we have amazing guests and some of the most brilliant conversations. In this episode, Sir is going to talk about the legal education, his journey with law school, and what differences he has seen with different law schools that he's been to. He will also talk about litigation, the various challenges that come with litigation, and how various legal aspirants can overcome that. And finally, we will talk about ethics in litigation. We will also talk about constitutionalism. We will talk about various interests. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share, and subscribe because I really enjoy recording these episodes and I really need your support. If you have any suggestions, feedbacks, make sure you reach out to me. I would absolutely love that. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. Hello, sir. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am so blessed to have this opportunity to talk to you and have this opportunity to interview you. I believe anyone who listens to this podcast and tunes into the One Take Show will benefit so much from our conversation today. You have been a role model and a luminary in the field of law for everyone, every aspirant, every law student. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking time out for today.
Thank you, Kaustubh, for all those very kind words. I severely worry about the health of the younger members of the legal community if I'm a role model of any sort. I would have hopefully found a scenario where they have really upstanding, fine lawyers to look up to. But thank you for that introduction.
Sir, if I speak on behalf of the entire legal fraternity as well as especially the law students, I think I am a huge fan of Conversations with Citizens. I enjoy every episode. I've also followed each and every article that you've written on Indian Express. I love what you write and I love reading and collecting ideas from the same. So for me, it's personally a dream come true. Uh, Beginning with the conversation, sir, before we talk about the further part of your journey, I'm very curious as to how was your journey with law as far as your experience in the law school, NLS, was concerned, and how did your any experience stand out, or how did you decide to do law or something of that?
Well, to start chronologically, I think the decision to do law came when I was quite young. I think members of my family had always said, look, this guy loves English and he loves to argue a lot. Mainly my mother and my brother. And they said, he should possibly try law because all he does is argue about everything. It's possibly not the best reason to become a lawyer. But I had that had an impression on my mind at that point of time. And it's something which, as it helped that I grew up in Bangalore. So we had the National Law School just coming up around when I was in my high school, middle school, high school, and we were local guardians to two students who were there in the law school at that time. Vivek Menon, who now practices in Bombay, and later Divya Balagopal Mundkur, who co-runs a firm on the commercial side in Bangalore. Both excellent lawyers. And because they were at home and they used to keep going to the law school and they used to narrate their experiences, we just found that it sounds like a really interesting place. I also was not very good at science. It's right now, during the COVID, I was just discussing with my wife yesterday. It's amazing about how actually each of these medicines that we hear of, ivermectin and remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine, how they work against the virus, or how they're expected to work against the virus. And I was saying, if only chemistry and biology had been taught better in our schools, maybe we would have been so interested in it. I was just turned off science because I didn't get good grades in it, and chemistry was something that really was just so difficult and a drudgery, and I regret that. So if you really wanted to do arts, and I wanted to do arts and humanities, there were very few options for you, later on. and I think it helped that so far in Indian college education, a really good liberal arts education as such was really considered to be something in DU like Stephens, Hindu, Hansraj, or of course the big universities in Calcutta and in Bombay. And in Bangalore, National Law School seemed to be a place which, despite being a law college, was actually becoming a melting pot of ideas. It was actually coming up with liberal arts ideas. So it seemed like a very obvious option to do that. But I did a year of college in Bangalore before that at the St. Joseph's. I did history, economics, and political science before I joined law school. But that was how I got into law, really. Of course, like I keep telling many people, there's a charm about a college before it becomes this behemoth in people's minds. When we joined law school, there weren't other law colleges then, or this National Law University type of law colleges. So we did an entrance exam which didn't have that many, 2,000 people or something doing it. We have like 40,000 or something doing it. Most of us, I'm sure, all of us, would probably not have got it. There are a few of us who would have gotten if we had to do the exam. So we were fortunate about that. But I think we were equally fortunate about the fact that therefore you had a mix of people. It wasn't about really just being good on a single test, right? So you had a lot of people who were not that academically inclined, who were just had reasonable smarts to get through those kind of the entrance exam at that time. So I think from that generation, I think particularly from the time when we were in law school, which is say from 96 to about 2004, that period when it hadn't become this crazy kind of competition to get in, you had a lot of people who had a lot of balance about life generally. So like I was telling somebody else the other day, you wouldn't find so many guys who passed out who eventually went and did law. Many of them went into entrepreneurship. They went into social work. They went into some of them completely left law and went into selling a kebab roll on the streets of London, right? So it was a eclectic mix of people we had, and I think that helped mold us in many ways. You had these people from across the country coming there, across many Asian countries. We had classmates from Mongolia and Bhutan and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, and it was truly national. I love the fact that however regionalistic we might have been before that, this is the first time that you're thrown into that kind of a national milieu, and you're forced then to try and understand that this is much bigger than you. Humanity is so much bigger than you. It's not just about your state or just about India. It's about the world, and it's a great melting pot where you're narrating and relating these ideas, and you're figuring out that your classmate from Bhutan is actually loves to tend sheep on his summer holidays, right? So I mean, it's a huge thing that you begin to understand that, wow, we're actually mixing with people who we haven't customarily mixed with, and you didn't anticipate that would happen. So for me, a large part of the law school experience was that.
Right, sir.
The kind of people there.
This is a very interesting account as far as experience in the law school is concerned, because I also come from Dr. Ramanolaya National Law University. So I also am a student of humanities. So I completely draw the straight inspiration from your experience. But this makes me all the more curious because you moved to London School of Economics. And then we talk about this parallel of educational setups. We see that universities across the world offer a very interesting model of education, and the national law universities, especially in our times, is being criticized for the kind of education that they provide. Did you see any parallel shift or a huge shift as far as the educational conceptuality or the mindset of the people is concerned from NLS to LSE?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about that as well in the Journal of the Bar Association of India about 4 years ago, saying that, very often we use phrases like Harvard of the East and stuff like that about many of our institutions. And I said, we must understand two things. One, that they've been around for hundreds of years, right, with a lot of money. Yes. And the second, because of those first two factors, they have built up formidable structures which help their institutions thrive. Now, the one thing that we lack, and when I say we lack, I mean every single college in this country, law college in this country, every single one of them lack the mechanisms, the structures you need for an institution to be a long-standing institution of excellence. A lot of it I put down to the fact that the individuals who found and direct these institutions must set in place those kind of structures. Now, it can't be, and this is something we find in the Supreme Court as well, it can't be that the institution runs based on the ad hoc philosophy of the man at the helm at that point of time. Right? So we had a very clear law school when Professor Menon was the Vice Chancellor. Then when Professor Mitra was there, it changed. Then Professor Mohan Gopal had changed. Professor Jai Govind had changed. Right? And Professor Rao had changed. So it's been very different directions. That's the same thing with the Supreme Court. You know, with the last 5 Chief Justices, we've had very different kind of functioning. So from the person who is availing of that service, right, a litigant or a student or a professor in an institution, they're completely at sea about, my God, this could all change suddenly, right? So LSC, I think the fact is that you have a very strong governing board of the university, which then helps direct the academic functioning and the executive functioning, etc. It's not a bunch of people like we have in all our colleges of nominees of the Bar Council, some guy from the local state government, etc., who are not really invested in the institution. So whenever something goes belly up in your institution, you find students of universities having to go and sit outside the gate, protest, write letters, go into media. The executive council, the governing council should say, hey, this is my institution, let me figure out how to protect it, right? Right. So that shouldn't be happening. I mean, you wouldn't find that happening in these big universities. Why? Because you have structures in place which help that. So in LSE, for example, there were, at the year that I was there, which is 2001 to 2002, it was the last year when the London School was part of the larger University of London. So the big advantage we had when we took courses in any one of the colleges was that we had profs from the other colleges of the University of London, right? Where also law is taught at a very high level. King's College and University College London and St. Mary in Westfield and School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. Right. You had the teachers from there coming and taking courses for you. Right? So we had that borrowing, which doesn't happen after that. And sometimes we'd go to classes to each of these other colleges to sit and take lessons. So you found that for just the masters in law, for example, I did a master's in criminology and law. We had about 150 distinct subjects. Wow. And we had to choose 4. Wow. Okay? And across all verticals. So obviously they're strong. I mean, they're known as the School of Economic and Political Science. But very few people understand that at that point of time, we had one of the strongest faculties in the world on international law. We had one of the strongest faculties on economic law and business relations. And I was fortunate to take the Law of Armed Conflict and Use of Force course. And my prof is today a judge of the International Court of Justice, Professor Greenwood. Outstanding mind. He's the co-editor of the International Law Report, right. Co-editor of the new Oppenheim's International Law, which is coming out. So these are guys, you see their level of discipline, their application, their knowledge, how they squeeze so much into a single day. There's no comparison at all. There are, of course, very many people who work that hard, but then in India, but they're not getting institutional support. Right. If you take one of your big, and that's because you don't have enough people doing it. Like just for international law, you'd have 4 professors, full professors. You'd have about 7 assistant professors. You'd have about 12 lecturers. right? And then they would have their teaching assistants, their research scholars, and the rest of it. So you have such a big faculty working strongly on one single area out of 150. Now, over here, we take the environmental law prof and ask him to teach intellectual property, right? So that kind of stuff doesn't work. Yeah, I mean, and we as students, remember how unforgiving we were. Say, yaar, he doesn't know. I asked him what this is, he didn't know. But if you put yourself in his position, he's there to teach that. It's a hard task for him. And remember that these guys are A, not well. B, they have to not only prepare and teach you a subject which is not their subject, they have to then set projects for you. They have to correct your midterm and end some exam papers. Then they're expected on their own to try and do independent research and publish papers. Who has the time? How many of your teachers at the moment would you find from RML who are sitting and able to publish papers? Publish papers is not like a random newspaper article, right? It's a proper research piece and it's peer reviewed and you get it published. How many people have that time? Because you should ensure that if you're working like in a trimester system, that your teachers work for 2 trimesters and 1 trimester is off. They don't come to class. That's the time that they dwell and study and learn and share their research. But we don't have the bandwidth to be able to allow that.
Right.
So until we do that, that's not going to happen. And the only way to do that is to throw money at them. We have to have because many of these are national universities, we have to have our governments, our private sponsors, all of them bring a lot of money into this. You have to attract the best talent.
Right, sir. I think this is a very interesting and very important take on the entire issue, especially when we see there are a lot of fronts that I think every law student who, or every legal fraternity, anyone who, even if there are professors or faculties who tune into this conversation would understand that these are real problems and are actually plaguing the situation. We find a lack of connect as far as the kind of quality that we might expect. So this actually leads in a very important question, which is sort of comes out of the paralysis that a lot of law students face when we compete with the law students from across the world, from different universities. One, for example, NUS, the National University of Singapore, especially in the field of arbitration. Personally, I've had this experience of them being highly superior in that field. Coming to you, sir, personally, at this instance, a very small question is that how can, in your opinion, law students or fresh legal aspirants who are entering the industry can navigate their way, for example, to make the best of their law school, as well as make themselves conducive candidates for the opportunities that open up? We can talk about like various opportunities that are now lying in front of us, especially after this pandemic has given us different changes in perspective. How can we make the best of ourselves?
Well, I have always felt, and I place great stock by the internships you do. Okay, picking up research skills, picking up knowledge is one thing, but then picking up, I think, very importantly, the idea of working in a structure with other people in an office atmosphere and understanding what assistants require, putting it together. I think that's very, very critical. So I don't think that enough emphasis is being placed on that. Like I've said many times, when you go on an internship, if you're genuinely caring about that, that could be the break. And I'll tell you honestly, I've seen, this is not just, it's not a generational thing at all. I remember that when I was a kid and when I was interning, surprisingly, about 70% of my colleagues who were also interning weren't so into it. You know, this is something that they were doing during the vacations. So they were just happy when they came to court to just hover around near a court, to be sitting in the canteen downstairs, trying to figure out how to take a break in the afternoon to go and watch a movie, you know. And I think I've seen that even now. I see many interns just happy to sit back, be a wallflower, wait for the certificate. Certificates are not going to take you anywhere, let me honestly tell you. Okay, the certificates that you get from an internship are merely just supposed to say, okay, this is the kind of work you did, this is how good you are. Okay? Unless the person giving you a certificate is somebody who's highly regarded by a future employer, and the certificate strong enough to show that instead of 5 lines saying Kaustubh has done a great job, he's very good, I recommend him highly, it's nonsense. You have to get personal and understand exactly what Kaustubh did.
Right.
Mention what his specific pieces of work were, how it happened, get granular. And then say, because of A, B, C skill sets that I saw, I recommend him. Right? Now, most certificates are not that. So if most certificates are not that, that certificate is not going to help. What's going to help is the impression you make in that period that you are there with that person. Now, if you're able to contribute, if you're able to spend lots of time in that office, right, just reading, being around, taking initiative and saying, sir, can I help you with this? Can I help you with this? Etc. Which can make a difference later. So that when you get in touch with ma'am or sir at a later stage and say, I was wondering, I had a really good experience, would it be possible for you to consider? It can make a difference. It has made a difference in the manner in which my wife Haripriya and I look at juniors and have recruited them, etc. And many of our friends also, that makes a difference. One thing I think many people need to understand is, it's not like there is no demand for good lawyers fresh from college. There is a demand. Okay. The problem is that the supply line doesn't meet the demand line. In court, for example, for many years now, I've had people come up to me and say that, look, Gopal, I know you're in touch with some of these kids from college. Would you know any good junior to recommend? Right? So then I will talk to a few kids who've written to me, emailed, etc., and say, look, there is this other option, and I would recommend A, B, C aspects of that office, but there may be D, E, F drawbacks as well. You guys take the call, but these are options. So that's a kind of mentoring which I feel is important. We need to do that. It's not that whenever somebody writes to me, I can offer him or her a job, but I'm happy to have a chat and discuss with them what their future line can be. So I think there is always that option. I think the biggest, most important thing for me is that take your internship seriously, and that doesn't mean take it seriously only when you're there. Take it seriously before you get there. Your choice of that office. Why did you choose that office? What did you know about it? What kind of homework did you do on it? Remember that homework you do in your second year could well translate into somebody employing you in your fifth.
Right, so I think this is extremely important. As you mentioned, there's a lack of mentorship that we also experience, and also one of the reasons why I attempt to reach out to the luminaries in the field and try to talk this out. But I think the fact that yes, internships are overlooked by the law students themselves, and we also only get to realize the importance of internships after we reach the 3rd or 4th years, and then we start taking our internships extremely seriously. But so, like, you've had a very lucrative career which has inspired so many people. You've had around almost 18 years of experience in litigation, and that has given everyone sort of a footstep to follow, a roadmap to look up to. We talk about litigation as a field which is extremely daunting with the times that now we see that major law schools are now evaluated based on the kind of placements that they offer to the corporate houses, corporate firms. But for the legal aspirants who want to get into litigation are usually daunted by the fact that either they're first generation lawyers or do not come from a very strong background, or the challenges in the next 5-6 years are going to be extremely daunting. So very straightforward, do you have any suggestions for any of the legal aspirants who enter the industry and are trying to make it in the litigation but face these kind of challenges, and how they can increase their odds of success especially in this field of litigation?
Yeah, so I think the first thing and the most important thing is patience. If you choose litigation, understand that at least for the first 10 years, money is not going to come rushing in. Mm-hmm. It's going to be touch and go and a bit of a struggle. It's necessary for you not to rush into independent practice. Okay?
Right.
It obviously depends on where you start. If you decide to start in a trial court, you obviously can move into independent practice a little earlier. In the High Court, maybe a little later, and in the Supreme Court, the latest of all, right? I went independent 10 years after I left law school. Okay? In the meantime, there were many people who went independent in 2 years, 3 years, right? And who were proud to say, look, I went independent. That ephemeral pride you get so that the ego can be in some way addressed, that all my other friends who are in corporates and feeling cool, I can say that I've gone independent, is not worth the balance if you're not going to be busy enough to be in court every single day, right? You will reach a stage where you have enough of your own work so that you can't continue working for someone else or with someone else. When you reach that balance and you find yourself that busy, that's when you say, sir or ma'am, I'm sorry, I'll have to move on. I found enough to sustain me for a while, right? But until you reach that, it's going to be extremely difficult. And which is why automatically the second point comes in, which is that when you choose a place to join in litigation, make sure that the person you're working with allows you to do independent work. Because if they don't allow you to do independent work, you will not grow, you will not get enough work, and you will have no way of measuring exactly to have enough to go out on your own. Now, all this advice is for first generation lawyers. Okay? Because it's something I did and it's something my wife did. Neither of us got work from anybody anywhere else. We had to do this all on our own. And remember that we both tore ourselves away from our comfort spaces. She's from Chennai and I'm from Bangalore, and we both came to Delhi. It's not the most hospitable of places to be in, and you have to spend on rent every single day, and virtually everything is an expense. So it wasn't easy. There are times when you're taking buses and you're taking autos and doing all that struggle, right? Many second generation lawyers won't have to do that. There will be a third generation. They will have many doors open. Many people are familiar with them from childhood because they've known them at the bar, they've known the kids and stuff like that. So, but don't get dismayed by the fact that there are a clutch of second generation lawyers who are really, taking leaps or steps, which you feel, hey, if I was in that position, I could. This is not a competition. It's not a race. You are not putting yourself up against anybody else. Remember also that for many of those second or third generation lawyers, you judge them harshly if you say that, hey, look at him, he got it so lucky. Maybe he genuinely likes law. You know, when you grow up in a household, because I'm seeing this as a first generation couple, we have 3 kids. And I see my daughter comes in. Yesterday I had a court hearing and I was on this with a bench, Justice Ashok Bhushan's bench. And she came and stood right here on the right side of my screen. And I was gently telling her, just go away. But she was curious. She wanted to know what is happening, right? So as kids, when you grow up in those families, you see your dad wearing this thing. Sometimes you may hear about him from others, etc., etc. And you wonder, what is all this thing about? So there is a romance about it, remember, because unlike people in virtually any other profession, we are costuming ourselves. We're wearing a coat and a gown and we're wearing a band, and it's theater, right? Fortunately, unlike in England, we're not wearing a powdered wig. But imagine if you stepped out of your house every day, your little kid is looking at you and wondering, my God, where's that hero going? So you have to forgive and understand that many second, third generation lawyers are possibly, they've just been enamored and they've always wanted to do it. And their parents said, well, you want to do it, you do it. It's not necessary that most of those big guns whose kids are coming to law have either pushed them into the law or are trying to push them ahead in the profession. There are guys who do that. And I think that's terrible for the kids, right? You want them to stand on their own 2 feet. They're not going to be able to survive the big time if they're going to be pushed and given this cushy cushion all through. But therefore, don't look at it as a competition at all. Don't keep looking at the fact that you are a second generation or a first generation lawyer. That's not relevant. You are an advocate. You have come to practice. Figure out the best way to do it. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing.
Right, sir. I think that's a very interesting take, and also kind of an opportunity to change the perspectives of people, especially the ones who are trying to enter this field firsthand. Will need to see
Yeah,
this not exactly as a competition, but an area of opportunity that they can exploit
absolutely.
on multiple fronts.
And let me just back up to say this, that um, you must. Sorry. I was just saying one other thing, that it's not only about in litigation. Anywhere you are,
Mhm.
as a student, as a master student abroad, if you go for that, and if you're working in the corporate space, I also forget about what other people are doing. Okay,
Right.
because I've known many of my friends who have worked in very toxic corporate environments and toxic litigation environments also,
Right.
where the boss would deliberately play favorites,
Mhm.
deliberately make one guy a partner and make the other guy a senior associate,
Mhm.
right? Because you're not getting in that chunk of money. And
Mhm.
obviously that's going to hurt.
Right.
But the thing is, if you keep looking at this as a competition, you're never going to be at peace. Yeah, it's never going to happen. It's not a competition. There's
Right.
enough and more of the chunk for everybody. There is, unfortunately, for our country, with 1.3 billion people, you're not going to ever run out of work. There is
Right.
enough and more.
Right.
The only thing is, don't look at it as a competition, please. Anything, even getting grades in your college, etc. Some guy wants to top and crack it. Good for him. That's what
Right.
keeps it going for him. It may not necessarily be the thing for you, so you don't have to do that.
Right. That's a very, at least for me personally, that's a very therapeutic sort of an stance to take. A lot of law students, especially legal professionals, face a lot of mental health issues because of the kind of competition, comparison, and jealousy that occurs in the field. I think this
Yeah.
kind of an attitude will answer a lot of those questions. But sir, you are looked up to by the entire legal fraternity as one of the young, energetic faces in the circle of senior advocates that we have. The change has been very dynamic, and the kind of approach has been very dynamic. And personally, I believe we've read your interviews, we've read your articles, and we keep following your work. But I believe this is a very particular question, that have you noticed any change in your practice, and how has it gone? Because this is something I would ask from a perspective of a dreamer, that someday if I reach where you are, possibly closer to whatever you've accomplished, maybe I could experience the same. So how has the experience been? Has there been a huge shift or change from you being coming into the circle of the senior advocates, and how do you see that this circle or this growth for first generation lawyers as you are, or for National Law University graduates, to travel all this journey of litigation and reaching to a point of success and giving back to the society now?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the change should not be of you. If the environs around you change, you should attempt to be the same person you were when you were wearing the different gown, right? So for me, one of the things that I always wanted to do was that I've always felt that I think I came into the profession at a time when it was going through its most profitable era. From 2000 to 2010 was this time when there was this explosion in lawyers' fees, right? So, and we began to see that, and I think there was something that made me, feel that there should be something different. There must be a different way of doing this. It can't only be about money. And it was becoming hugely about that, right? And people used to talk about it with awe. There were many solicitors and others who used to say, this guy is charging, 20 lakhs for a case, and saying, and for 2 minutes, yaar, and kya baat kiya, notice, stay, sab kuch ho gaya. And I was thinking, it's not a matter of pride. It should not be a matter of pride that you're charging the most prohibitive fees when it comes to clients, because the minute you charge 20 lakhs, you're taking 99% of our population out of your clientele. And that's not cool. That's not what this profession was for.
Right.
If the best doctors in the country were to start saying that consultation fees is 2 lakhs for 5 minutes, would that be okay? we would be up in arms, wouldn't we?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with the fact that it's become so prohibitive. I mean, with the kind of work we do, it's not a question of whether it is a proportional to the work that you put in. Or it's not like that. It's just that you have a meter which is used across the globe. It's
Right.
quite crazy that in one of the countries with the lowest per capita incomes, that our lawyers are the highest charging in the entire world,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and that by 8 times or 9 times. I mean, it's not by little amount, right? So
Right.
a top senior advocate, a really top senior advocate, in the Supreme Court would in a day earn how much a top QC in the UK would earn in an entire month. Now, in a country like ours, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So, for me, I think that was always at the back of my mind. So, whenever the work used to come and clients used to get in touch, I've always had the measure of telling them, or solicitors, that look, I leave it to you. You decide, because I trust my solicitors, all of them. I
Right.
trust them to feel that what is right. But the thing is, when I say that to them, I also send them the message that you also do the right thing.
Right.
Even if you feel that, hey, times are hard and I need to charge a little extra, you may feel not to. And actually, they have the best measure of the client. I don't. So they're in touch with the client all the time. So I think for me, that makes a big difference. And for a long time, I mean, doing pro bono work, doing PILs, all of that has been a consistent part of what I was. Obviously, let's be candid about this. When you take on that kind of work, you get noticed, right? It also gives you appearances,
Right.
right? So obviously that was an advantage that worked in my favor, I guess, when I'm in court, right? That recognition. But once the designation happened, it's not been long. It's been 15 months now. But that hasn't really changed. I still do that stuff. I still do like 50% of my work even now is pro bono, right? So for me, that hasn't changed. So, they usually talk about how, your fees start going through the roof. My idea is not to have my fees start going through the roof. Let me give you an example. In 2004 or 2003, there was a top litigation solicitor firm, the number one litigation solicitor firm in the Supreme Court now, and Mr. Chidambaram had been engaged, and Mr. Chidambaram is an outstanding lawyer, and works really hard on his brief and knows everything, very articulate, excellent. So possibly at his peak in 2002 or 2003, the solicitor asked him, how much would you charge for a hearing? So Chidambaram said 35,000. He said 35,000 at a time at which all his contemporaries were charging 3.5 lakhs, 4 lakhs. All right? He said 35,000. So the solicitor said to him, sir, if you charge 35,000, hamara kya hoga? Right? Because you have to measure the distance, na? If I get the guy who charges 4 lakhs, I can justify to the client that I'm raising 45,000, 50,000. But if I'm getting the guy who's charging 35,000, and Mr. Chidambaram said this, I mean, whatever your political notions may be about the man, he's a top class advocate. And he said, that's your business. This is mine. This is what I'm comfortable charging. So somebody else told him, sir, but others, all these guys are charging 3-4 lakhs. He said, this is not a horse race. This is advocacy. Right? And I really appreciate that. I think that's the notion that we should have as advocates. It doesn't matter, that guy will have a BMW and he'll drive to work. You'll still come in and old Maruti. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you should be comfortable with what you're doing. So for me, I think that philosophy still lasts. So that hasn't changed, and I hope sincerely that it won't change. Right? It's all very easy for that to change. For you to say that, look, I've struggled for so many years. Now at least I should get my due. But the idea is to try and keep that balance. And if you have good people around you, family, friends, etc., I think it'll help you keep rooted.
Right, sir. But that is very interesting, very new. I will be very honest with you. I have never received a perspective like this before as far as litigation or this profession is concerned. You have talked about integrity as an indispensable part of this profession. How what lawyers should definitely have is integrity, and I think this reflects in your perspective. And we as law students who are now trying to uphold that passion should really learn from this. This brings
Fantastic.
me right, sir. This brings me to the last my set of questions. I have been I have followed your research works. I think all your articles. I personally love them. Our professors in our law school also keep referring to them when they talk about constitutional laws, especially. And you have shared a fair amount of interest in constitutional law. You have also shown considerable amount of interest in that field. I would just like to know what was your experience like when it comes to your contribution to the Bhutan's constitution, or you looking at the situation right now and looking at the interest of the students, probably shifting away from the constitutionalism and constitutional issues to commercial laws, but still the niche area, the niche students still finding interest in the research, writing articles, writing research papers, researching in the field of constitutional issues, especially in our country.
A whole bunch of questions rolled into one, so I'll go bit by bit. I did a bunch of moots in college, and I love the fact that we used to get so detailed about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of a group of mooters in those days where we would really go very deep into a case. I think I don't know why we did that. It was not possibly the most efficient way to go about it, but in my view it was the only way to go about it. So when we found a proposition, we would first find all the cases on the proposition, then we would find every case cited in those cases, and every case cited in those cases which was cited in those cases. You get what I'm going? So eventually when we started with a proposition, we had 80 cases, we would finally have 500. And we would actually go into every single case, make notes, try and figure out how we can find conflicts or say that there is an inconsistency, try and get around legal points. So as you're doing that, I think you inevitably realize when you do, particularly Indian law, that everything comes back to the constitution. It could be tax, it could be cattle trespass, it could be free speech. Everything comes back to the constitution. So you have to, no matter on whatever point you're researching, start with the constitution, start with the lists, go to the legislation, try and find out whether the order is ultra vires or not. So for me, I think that learning process is something that I got addicted to. And there is a funny thing. I have otherwise not been a very hard worker in school and college, etc., studying, that's not my thing. But you give me a particular point of law and I will go right down to the end. That is something I can do. Okay, if there's one skill that I really have, it's that, because I like it. If you don't enjoy doing it, you really can't be very good at it. But if you do enjoy doing it, you can really go down deep. So that's why constitutional law really enamored me, because it's the one area of law where I couldn't find an end. On any point of law, you would reach a hard halt at some point. With this, I never reached a hard halt. I would go somewhere and it would take me somewhere else to the Federalist Papers in the US. And then it would take me, so like, wow, I mean, this is just never ending.
Right.
And for me, that was a challenge. And it still is a challenge, right? So I'm still a student of constitutional law. So every single thing is nice and new. And I can't believe when they talk about law being living, that for me, the Constitution is the most obvious example of that. There's no absolute answer in the Constitution. And the fact that there's no absolute answers allows you to provide all possible answers you can. So that's why on virtually any issue, if it really touches you and permeates you and drives you, you can find many ways of approaching it. So I was fortunate in my early years with Mr. Venugopal that he was asked to be the advisor to the Constituent Assembly of Bhutan, where Jigme Singh Wangchuk had advised for the coming up of a new constitution, for the first time a constitution. And their advisors, the law minister, all of them came and sat across. And like I told you earlier, I had classmates from Bhutan, from law school. So many of these chaps were in Bhutan, and we'd speak on the phone as well. And we'd understand who these people were, what their perspectives were. Very interesting, simple draft of the constitution that they came with. And the challenge was, this was a new culture which you didn't really know too much about.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to spend a lot of time educating myself so that I can assist Mr. Venugopal on what the culture of Bhutan is really about. To understand that these things may not fit for India, but they definitely fit for them, right? To have a concept like gross domestic happiness in your constitution is a unique thing. So, and they had come with some borrowings from the Human Rights Declaration and from the US Constitution and the Indian Constitution, etc. That put together. So we had to unthread it and figure out how it works and figure out inconsistency from one part to the other. We've always drafted small bylaws or something else, but this is a huge task because it's a huge responsibility on you, and you can't allow errors to creep in. So it's basically the lawyers and the law minister and everybody from Bhutan and Mr. Venugopal, and he's turning to me for assistance. So I have to be as careful as possible. It's a lovely challenge when you're young in the profession and you're energetic and you want to do more, for you to actually try and get into it. So for me, that was a fantastic experience. I mean, all the direction and the thoughts, etc., are all obviously Mr. Venugopal's, along with the lawyers from Bhutan. So one must be careful never to overstate your role. Right. It's very easy to say, I drafted. I didn't draft. I didn't do anything close to that. Okay, I am like the guy who was a secretary to B.N. Rao when it came to our constitution. That was my job. Okay, so let's limit it to that. It's a fantastic learning experience. And today when you see that, hey, this guy is a designated senior counsel, he must have had a big role with that. No, he didn't. He was a young boy who was in a top lawyer's office who was assisting with that. So the credit is all his. I did a lot of hard work to try and help with that. The government of Sri Lanka also, they've gone through many avatars of their constitution. So they had reached out to Mr. Venugopal also. Because, I mean, I think he brings a completely clean slate to new constitutions and new laws, and his curiosity is actually infectious. So we worked on that also around the same time. So it was fascinating about, it was prior to the final war with the LTTE and stuff. So there were different provisions for the Northeast and the Jaffna Peninsula and stuff like that. So it was fascinating. I mean, those two experiences were very, very good. And that's always something that every time something comes up in court, especially over the last 2 years, we've had lots of issues which are so deeply constitutional, right? Sabrimala and CA and Kashmir. So these are things which provoke you to write because so much is written, but because you've spent so much time doing constitutional law, you think maybe there's a different perspective you could offer.
Right, sir. This is very important because as law students we've read about the constitutional debates, the Constituent Assembly debates, and we've only dreamt of the fact that the epoch of legal engagement is possibly writing the constitution of a country or engaging in the constitution of a country in a way or the other. But you've had a first-hand experience with the same as well. I think this conversation is inspiring and very is opening a lot of doors and opportunities for everyone who tunes into this podcast and tries to learn about litigation, wants to learn about your journey, wants to learn about the different perspectives of law school and everything. I think so. This was a wonderful opportunity for me. Do you have any closing remarks for my listeners?
No, I'm just happy that we have platforms like yours, Kaustubh, where people like me are given an opportunity to speak to you and possibly share our thoughts, because it seems like an exercise in vanity otherwise. But I feel equally that each of us tread different paths, and whatever little we have learned or whatever our experiences are, it's important for us to share it. And please do make an endeavor of reaching out to others who are not seniors and all of that, because every person's experience is different. And there would be many of my colleagues, contemporaries, seniors and junior who would have their own stories to tell. And all the very best with more storytelling and more interactions. And I look forward to having you listen to my conversations with citizens in the future.
Well, so most certainly, I think Conversations with Citizens is the kind of staple that we all go to not just learn about the various facets. I personally go there to learn how to conduct a session of that sort and to learn from the soft skills that you project. I think so. This is extremely important for all of us. Thank you so much, sir. I think I had a wonderful time. Everyone who would be listening to this podcast will have a wonderful, wonderful time. They will have a lot of value that is being added to their perspectives, to their personalities. I had a wonderful time. I hope you had a good time too, sir.
I did, Kaustubh. I think it was very interesting. It's stuff that I haven't thought about or talked about for a while, and always thought-provoking questions. So I'm very, very happy to have had this opportunity. Thank you again very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks.